Welcome back to the GCN Racing News Show. Coming up this week, after an epic stage into Paris, should Montmartre be a permanent inclusion on stage 21 of the Tour de France? I'll be asking that question, as well as wrapping up the final week of the race, how Pogačar is thinking of retirement sooner than we thought, plus the opening stages of the Tour de France Femmes avec Zwift and the Tour de Wallonie. This week in the world of racing, we learnt that whilst Quinn Simmons may not have got that elusive stage win at the Tour de France, he did get engaged. He proposed to his girlfriend Sydney, who said yes. Now that's a win. We also learned that this year's Tour de France was the fastest in history. Now the exact speed is still being debated due to the neutralisation of GC times on yesterday's stage, complicating matters, but it was somewhere between 42.45 and 42.9 kilometres per hour. Crazy speeds. And finally, we learned that Tadej Pogačar is the youngest rider ever to have reached the grand heights of 4 overall wins at the Tour de France. But was it his hardest yet? Quite possibly. His final margin of victory was a comfortable one, close to 4.5 minutes in front of Jonas Vingegaard, with Florian Lipovic at over 11 minutes. However, it really did feel like this edition was a draining one for everybody, including Pogačar himself, in a way that we haven't seen before. So over the last week of the race, Pogačar never looked in trouble, but he also didn't win a stage, and his demeanour during post-race interviews was uncharacteristic. He was a little bit less sparkly, a bit less bubbly, and a little bit less energetic than what we're used to. For the first time ever, it felt like cycling hard for 3 weeks was even taking its toll on Pogačar, and it led many to speculate as to whether he wasn't enjoying it as much this year. Now, I would say that we're probably overanalyzing things, as we do with any great champion. You're looking for signs of weakness, signs that their reign is coming to an end, but at the same time, it did feel a bit of a shift, didn't it? However, given that he raced the UAE Tour, all the classics and the Dauphiné ahead of this year's Tour de France, it's not really a surprise that even he is starting to feel the physical and mental fatigue at this point. Yesterday, post-race, he even mentioned retirement to French newspaper L'Équipe. As far as I can remember, I've never heard him hint at a date for retirement before. So his quote was as follows: "I don't think I'll stop right away, but I also don't see myself going on too long either. The Los Angeles Olympics are one of my goals, which are 3 years from now. After that, I might start thinking about retirement. We'll see." And that, of course, is the part that made the headlines, but his next sentence is also worth reading out. "But if I keep riding like this, with such a strong team and such great support around me, I'm not too concerned about my future, I'm just trying to enjoy the moment." I think it's very hard for a sports person to know how they're going to feel years into the future. It might be that by 2028, Pogačar's desire to win will have abated. By that point, he'll have been a pro for 10 years, and I dread to think how much he'll have won by then. Money, of course, won't be a problem. It isn't already. Physically, it shouldn't be a problem either. He'll only be 29 years old. And so it will come down to motivation. Will he still have the motivation to win? And more importantly, the motivation to suffer in training, to still be at his peak in physical capabilities? Time will tell, I guess. But on to that final stage in Paris. Much had been made of the rerouting of that final circuit to include 3 passages of Montmartre. That's the cobbled climb that featured in last year's Olympic road races. Traditionalists were unhappy. A lot of the rides were too, but the incredible scenes that we witnessed yesterday have changed a lot of people's views. With rain forecast, the organisers took the decision to take GC times ahead of those final few circuits, meaning that only those who wanted to race really had to. And I think that says a lot about Pogačar, because whilst Vingegaard and Lipovic came in over 5 minutes down on the winner, Pogačar was up front attacking because he wanted to race and he wanted to win. And seeing the yellow jersey taking risks on the wet cobbles when he didn't have to really sums up who he is as a rider and as a person. He may be tired, he might be looking forward to a short holiday, but he was still up there racing it out, and in doing so, entertaining the huge crowd who'd come out to watch on the day. And my word, wasn't it entertaining? 6 riders found themselves out front in the finale. Pogačar himself, along with Van Aert, Trentin, Mohoric, Ballerini and Jorgensen. It was like a pure classic, full gas racing, just like the rest of the Tour de France had been. Pogačar put in one final dig on the last ascent of Montmartre, but he couldn't shake Van Aert. And not only that, Van Aert accelerated himself towards the top, and not even Pogačar could follow. It was the first time in 21 days, or perhaps more accurately, in about 2 years, that Pogačar had been dropped on a climb. L'Équipe described it as epic, or épique, and it was. And Van Aert felt like such a fitting winner of that final stage, didn't he? That was his 10th Tour de France stage win. Only one active rider has more than him, Pogačar, and only one other active rider has as many, Jasper Philipsen. And I take my hat off to Van Aert. I think it's fair to say that he hasn't been as good at this race as he was during his peak years, but he still got a win, and he got it on arguably the most prestigious stage of the race. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that stage. What did you think of the final around Paris this year? Would you have preferred that they stuck with tradition, or did you think it was a change for the better? Should they keep it, or go back to the sprint, or perhaps alternate between the two? You can let me know in the comment section just down below. Now, in answer to the question that was posed in the title of this video, was it the best Tour de France finish ever? I'd say no, it wasn't. I mean, it was amazing, but I'm not sure anything's ever going to come close to the Le Mans-Fignon final day upset back in 1989. I didn't witness it at the time, but as Grand Tour finales go, it doesn't really get much better than that. But yesterday was certainly right up there. It may not have had that GC drama, but it had pretty much everything else that you want to see in a great bike race. Anyway, once all was said and done, this is how the general classification looked in the top 10. Pogačar winning by 4 minutes 24 over Vingegaard and exactly 11 minutes over Florian Lipovic, who won the white jersey as best young rider. Just behind him in that classification, and fourth overall, was 22-year-old Oscar Onley. Felix Gall took fifth, which was a very solid performance for him, as it was too for Tobias Johannesson of Uno X in sixth. In fact, there were so many standout riders in the top 10, you could do a whole show about most of them. Kevin Vauquelin's 7th place on GC also made him the best French rider this year, and it was a tremendous 3 weeks from him. Primož Roglic took 8th, Ben Healy 9th, despite not coming into the race for GC, whilst Jordan Jagat managed to get a top 10 himself, leapfrogging Ben O'Connor by getting into the break on the penultimate stage of the race. The gap, though, between Jagat and Pogačar was enormous, 32 minutes and 47 seconds, which is the widest gap between 1st and 10th on GC in decades. A few more stats from the race now. Tadej Pogačar is the first reigning world champion since Greg LeMond in 1990 to win the Tour de France. Until yesterday's stage, he actually hadn't lost a single second on the road to any key rival on GC, and by that I mean the top 5. The only rider ever to have done that previously was Maurice Geraint in 1903, which was the inaugural edition of the race. It was the 5th time that Pogačar and Vingegaard finished 1st and 2nd on GC. That's never happened before with 2 other riders. I would go so far as to say, actually, that their rivalry is the biggest and best that we've ever seen at the race, or perhaps in cycling in general. Pogačar has equalled Merckx and Ullrich as the only riders to have finished on the podium of the race in their first 6 participations. But where Pogačar eclipses all others is that he's now finished on the podium of his first 8 Grand Tours. Nobody before has ever done that. He's also won at least 2 stages in all those 8 Grand Tours, but still has some way to go to beat Merckx, who, according to Killian Kelly, won multiple stages in his first 11. Right, a quick word on the other stage winners from the final week of the race. Caden Groves of Alpecin-Deceuninck won on stage 20 from the day's breakaway. After a nasty crash took down Romeo and Gregoire, he found himself in front with Stewart and Van den Broeke. However, they basically took themselves out of the running. Stewart got frustrated with Van den Broeke, stopped riding to try and force him to come through, and in the end, they both got dropped. Tijmen Arensman of Ineos Grenadiers did one of the most impressive rides of the whole race on stage 19. So he started the final climb that day in the group of Pogačar and Vingegaard, attacked them as they played cat and mouse, and then managed to cling on by the smallest of margins to take his 2nd victory at the race. Chapeau. Equally as impressive was Ben O'Connor's win on the Col de la Loze the previous day. He did so by breaking away some distance before that final climb, but it was a fantastic ride nonetheless. Valentin Paré-Pant gave the French their stage win this year on Mont Ventoux no less, and the 4th for Soudal Quickstep, whilst Jonathan Milan took a 2nd stage win the following day. Which brings me nicely on to the green jersey competition. Milan took that ahead of Pogačar by what was in the end quite a comfortable margin. Last year's winner Biniam Girmay was 3rd for Intermarché. Pogačar did take the KOM jersey though, with Vingegaard in 2nd, whilst Visma Lease Bike won the team's classification. Some kudos now to Lipovic and Onley, who gave us what was probably the most exciting battle in GC at the race. They were vying it out both for the young rider's white jersey, but also the third step of the podium. Lipovic looked to have it sewn up, both of them in fact, until the Col de la Loze, because there, Lipovic also tried to take advantage of the games being played between Pogačar and Vingegaard, but whilst he did build up quite a nice advantage by the foot of that final climb, he paid for his earlier efforts. Onley, meanwhile, was on the best day of his life. Just like Lipovic, he had been dropped on the previous climb, but on La Loze, he managed to match the two big guns almost to the line, and in doing so, he came to within 20 seconds of Lipovic on GC. Unfortunately for him, he didn't have the legs to back that up the following day, but he can be extremely proud of 4th overall. That was mightily impressive. But hats off to both of them. They were brilliant for the whole 3 weeks. Next up, Geraint Thomas. This year marked his 14th participation at the Tour de France and his 13th finish. Over that time, he's been 3 times on the podium, once on the top step, and taken 3 stage wins. So it brings to a close an amazing relationship that he's got with the race. From 2007, when he was the youngest participant, to 18 years later, when he was the oldest. He's not finished racing completely just yet. That's going to happen in his home of Wales at the end of the Tour of Britain in September. But I'd like to take this opportunity to say congratulations to him for everything he's achieved and for everything he's done for the sport. Right, just before I move on from the men's Tour de France, I've left the final word for this year for the team at ITV Cycling. This is a very British-centric take, but I make no apologies for including it now, because yesterday was the final time that ITV Cycling broadcast the Tour de France live here in the UK, which means in turn it's the last time for the foreseeable future that fans here in the UK will be able to watch the race on a free-to-view basis. It's been an institution of the sport here in the UK, from the times of Phil Liggett and Paul Sherwin through to Ned Boulting and David Miller et al. Now. There's no doubt that the cycling landscape over here would not be what it is now without that coverage, and it's probably shaped the race itself as well. By that I mean that many British pros, present and past, were introduced to this great sport by ITV and Channel 4's coverage. So, thank you for everything you've done. You are going to be sorely missed. And with that, I shall move on to the Tour de France Femmes avec Zwift. This year the race has been extended to 9 days, the longest in its short history, and as such, it started on Saturday in northwestern France. And we've had a couple of really tough stages already, actually. Day 1 was a short, punchy affair to Plumelec, with 3 ascents of a climb to finish with. Elise Chabbey took the points on the climbs, but the second time up it was actually a bonus sprint. One that wasn't really contested, certainly not as much as I expected it to be. Lorena Wiebes rolled across the line there to take maximum points, but Marianne Vos's absence there was perhaps a sign of things to come. On the final ascent to the line, Pauline Ferrand-Prévot took a flyer with around 600 metres remaining, riding Anna van der Breggen off her wheel, and she opened up a huge gap, and it was only when Kim Lecourt went that the gap started to reduce. Now unfortunately for Lecourt, she had Marianne Vos on her wheel. She came past Lecourt before they caught her teammate Ferrand-Prévot, looking over her shoulder to assess things as she considered gifting the stage to her teammates. But with Lecourt still going quite fast, Vos had no choice but to go round and take the victory herself. Her 258th career win, over 19 years since her first. And with that, of course, came the yellow jersey as well, for the second time in Vos's career. Stage 2 was also a hilly affair to Quimper, another one that looked perfect on paper for Vos. Elise Chabbey was once again up the road picking up more QOM points, and for a while that breakaway looked like it might threaten the win. Visma's work behind though put pay to that, but after the break was caught there was a bit of a lull, which is where Liverpool Jayco put their plan into action. They brought Mavi Garcia towards the front and she went on a solo attack. Having lost 5 minutes the previous stage, she was no threat on GC. I was still surprised to see how much leeway she was allowed, given that a stage win was on the line. Too much leeway, as it turned out. With 1k to go, she still had a 20-second advantage, and despite the efforts of Lotte Kopecky, Chloe Dygert and others, she was never caught. So at 41 years old, she's just taken the biggest win of her career. Second on that stage was Lorena Wiebes of SD Works, who was lengths clear of Lecourt in third. However, that third place was enough to put Lecourt into the yellow jersey. She's on the same time as Vos, but the difference was made through cumulative stage finishing positions. Vos was 5th on that second stage. So, going into stage 3 today, Lecourt is equal on time with Vos, with Ferrand-Prévot 3rd and Nubia Doma 4th. Pre-race favourite Vollering is currently 5th at 13 seconds, but then you'd imagine her main aim was just to get through those opening stages trouble 3. Julie Bago leads the Young Riders classification for Cofidis, whilst Voss leads the points. Although that might well change today. Stage 3 looks likely to end up in a bunch sprint, and if it does, of course Lorena Wiebes will be the big favourite. Unfortunately, there was also a couple of high-profile withdrawals in the opening days of the race, Marlon Reusser being the biggest of them all. She came into the race as the second favourite behind former teammate Demi Vollering, but started stage 1 with a stomach illness. She tried valiantly to finish that stage, but unfortunately it was all too much and she was forced to abandon. Charlotte Cole of Picnic Post-NL didn't start yesterday either, still suffering the after effects of a crash recently at the Tour of Belgium. Right, just finally, the Tour de Wallonie. So after 2 stages of racing, Cofidis' Oliver Knight leads the GC. He won the second stage yesterday from a group of 3 that had gone clear of just under 20 k's to go. They were caught, but not passed by the bunch at the finish line. Corbin Strong had won the opening stage and now sits 1 second behind Knight on GC, with 3 stages still remaining. And you'll be able to watch those stages live on Discovery Plus and Max, where you can watch a full season of bike racing, including mountain biking. And actually, I'll finish with that. Tom Pidcock won the European Championships yesterday, ahead of British compatriot Charlie Aldridge, with Simon Andreasen in 3rd. In the women's, Jenny Rissveds of Sweden doubled up. She took both the short track and the XCO titles. In the XCO, Evie Richards took 2nd, with Nicole Collar in 3rd. Okay, that is all for this week's Racing News Show. I look forward to reading your comments about Montmartre. I'll be back next Monday to wrap up the Tour de France Femmes avec Zwift. See you then.